Hello.
Hey, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our St. Louis Sudbury virtual Q&A session. I'm Jennifer Lynn. I am a parent of St. Louis Sudbury School and also on the board. And this is Mae Caratachea. She is a staff member at St. Louis Sudbury School and also co-president of the board.
And a parent.
And a parent. She does it all. So we're going to start out today with maybe just taking a look at a video that we have that gives you a little bit of background about St. Louis Sudbury School. So here it is. So Mae, can you tell us a little bit about what St. Louis Sudbury School is and what makes it unique here in St. Louis when we have so many educational choices?
Yeah. So Sudbury is it's Missouri's actually first and only so far democratic, self-directed school. So the students don't have a curriculum unless that's something they choose for themselves. And then if they do choose it, that's something that they kind of build, and the adults in the space are there to help them facilitate that and to give them resources to do that. But there is no compulsory aspect to the education. It's entirely student-led. Um, we believe that students learn best when it's organic and when it's led by their passions and their interests. And so St. Louis Sudbury is a space that allows students to do that within the context of a community where everything from what kinds of things we're going to spend our school money on to who we're going to hire as staff or volunteers, all of those things are voted on by students and staff and volunteers, and everyone has one vote. So a 5-year-old's vote, counts the same as a 50-year-old's vote, and everything is run democratic in that way.
Great, thank you. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask Mae about what Sudbury life is like, you can go ahead and put that in the chat in Facebook or on YouTube, and we'll make sure we get your questions answered. So Mae, so Sudbury doesn't have a required curriculum.
Right.
So what does that mean? Like, what do kids do all day?
Yeah, I think one of the most common questions we get is what are kids doing all day? Or a lot of times, most parents ask, are they learning, or how are they learning all day? We believe that living happens organically through learning, and I think adults understand that really well because while many of us aren't in continued education, we continue to learn and grow. We believe that children can do that just the same. And so most students spend their time playing. And there's, lots of evidence to suggest that when you are doing something that you enjoy, you can retain that much better than if you're doing something that you don't enjoy. So a lot of students do spend their time playing. Students spend their time doing anything from exploring subjects of interest online to hanging out and talking with their friends, learning instruments. And it changes quite a bit depending on the students that are around, because we tend to see students sort of pick up things by osmosis. So when one student shows an interest in something like roller coaster building, for instance, we might see some other students take an interest in engineering. And it changes really frequently. So we always say that just like in life, there's not really a typical Sudbury day because it really just kind of varies depending on how students are feeling that day and kind of what's going on.
What are some activities or areas that the current student body is interested in?
Yeah, so a lot of music. There are several students who've learned instruments in the past year. One in particular who spends most of his time in a recording studio that we have on campus. He kind of just records music, and that's what he primarily spends time doing. Really talented, super cool to see, and lots of board games, a lot of games in general, especially with younger students. They tend to cluster up in groups and play pretend for much of the day. And that's a really common activity. A lot of social skills being built. That's a pretty big deal for the younger ages, as far as learning social skills through play. Um, yeah, definitely a lot of online research as well. And especially for some of our older students, I think of one in particular who's really interested in war, really history, but the history of war in particular. And since I've been there over the last couple of years, he spends a lot of his time researching wars, and he's just kind of a wealth of knowledge on the history of wars at this point, because that's how he spends most of his time. But yeah, it really varies from student to student. But music is a big one. Art is a big one. A lot of students spend time creating. We have students, I mean, from every age range, from 6 on up, who spend time creating, whether it's building or drawing or painting, and that's really popular. I think that if students in traditional education in general kind of were given the time and space, my guess would be that they would spend a lot of time creating, and I don't think that that's given enough time in some more traditional education sectors. So I think it makes sense that students do spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. So we have a question here from Janelle. She says, "Hello, I'm a mother of a 15-year-old boy who is struggling in high school, socially and emotionally. I've done a lot of research on your school, and the only thing I haven't been able to find out is, are you year-round?"
Oh, we are. Yeah. And actually, it's cool because not all Sudbury schools are year round, but ours is, and that was determined by the student body. So, like I said before, decisions about the school are made by the students, and everything is put to a vote. And our students don't want to ever leave school, so they actually voted to go through the summer. And we joke about this every year, but the adults usually initiate breaks. So we'll initiate like a spring break or a summer break, and then we all vote on it. And getting these kids to take breaks is sometimes hard. We've had votes fail when we're like, oh, let's take a 2-week break or something. And they're like, oh, maybe like one, but that's pushing it. So we are year round, and we have rolling enrollment. So you can enroll at any time of the year. I'm sorry to hear, Janelle, that your son is experiencing those struggles. That's extremely common for us to hear, and we do get a lot of families that come in and kind of express that their students have struggled socially and emotionally in particular. It's not uncommon for students who even like perform academically really well, or maybe are kind of a ideal student on paper, like they have straight A's or that sort of thing. To still struggle socially and emotionally. So unfortunately, that's really common. But yeah, it's definitely something that we prioritize at our school. And because we are so small, it's something that we can give a lot of time and energy to, is sort of fostering an environment that is nurturing the student's social and emotional experience.
Yeah, I mean, I can say from my son's experience too, is that just, yeah, having that, the trust and the acceptance that the Sudbury community has just really opens up that door if a student is struggling, to feel okay about themselves and feeling okay about their environment and their friends and all that. And that's just been like an enormous, just valuable experience for our family and my son, to feel like he can go to school again. And Sudbury gives us that opportunity. We have another question from Ashley. Ashley says, "Hi, can you give a rough breakdown of the age composition of the current student body? I'm especially interested in how many 13 to 18-year-olds you have."
Sure. So right now our student body is right at 16, so it's pretty small. Our youngest are 6, I'm sorry, and then our oldest is right now 16. So between the 13 and 16 range, I would say there's about 7 or so students. So it's pretty split as far as like teenagers versus kids who are 12 and under. But we have a really good range of I guess 10 to like 14-year-olds. There's like a 5 or 6 of those guys. So
Let's see. We have another question. How is the school a democratic community?
yeah. So there's this meeting that we have twice a week. It's called school meeting. We have those on Mondays and on Wednesdays, and that is the opportunity for anyone in the community, not just students, but a volunteer or a staff member can also make a motion for different things to pass. And when I say different things, that really it could be so many different things. So we might pass a rule, we might pass a budget to purchase something for the school, we might pass a budget to hire a staff member, we might pass. We might make a motion to bring someone in as a volunteer, and all those things are voted on. So probably the things that come up the most frequently, I would say, is a student making a motion to spend a certain amount of money of the school budget on something, or for various classes. So they might make a motion to have an instructor come in, and they need that to be paid for, or just to get the permission to have the instructor come in, and all of that is voted on. So if not enough students want it, it won't pass. And so it definitely requires some communication. And we had students, pitch their case at multiple school meetings to try to get something to pass. And all of the main events that happen at school, or classes, or the ways that we spend our school budget, those things are all voted on.
Can you recall any motions like over the last couple years that have been unusual or memorable?
So many. So there was one that there've been lots of learning opportunities through making motions, right? And one thing that was happening kind of right after I got there was we had a young student, I think he was maybe 6 or 7 at the time, and he realized that he could make motions to purchase toys. I think he saw somebody do that, and then he was like, oh wow, like I can just come to school meeting and get the school to buy me a toy. And I think because he had never made a motion before, his first motion passed, and it was for a toy that he was very transparent and told the student body, like, he was taking it home. He was like, I just want to buy this toy for myself. And I think everyone was so excited for him that he was making a motion that we all voted yes. And then after that, he just, for a good few weeks, was like, every time he came to school meeting, was like trying to make a motion to buy himself toys. It ended really quickly because, his peers were like, oh, actually, we're not spending school money on that all the time. But that was his way of initially sort of coming into feeling confident enough to make a motion at school meeting. So that's always really cool to watch. It's usually younger kids, but I mean, it's kids of all age ranges. School meeting is definitely a space where students have to kind of, if they don't already gain some confidence and some skills in speaking publicly, and being able to do that. There's a learning curve for sure. And so many students come into school, and that's kind of like a daunting process for them. So it's fun to see them kind of grow into that and be able to do that. That same student actually also initially tried. He ended up bringing an engineer into school to start like an engineering class because he really wanted to learn how to build a roller coaster. But I think his first attempt was he wanted to pass a budget to buy a roller coaster. And then he also made a motion, or no, this was one of his peers made a motion to buy like a bouncy house. And we actually, where we're located, we rent space on the second floor of the Intersect Arts Center down on Texas Avenue. And we would never have been able to put a bounce house in this building, but he was like, it'll fit in the dance studio, it'll be perfect. So yeah, we've also had students just come to school meeting and purchase like pizza for the day for the school. So yeah. Lots of fun ones, and then some serious ones. Always with the rules, our students vote on all of our rules. And when I first got there, I was shocked at how many rules were in the rule book. I was expecting to see like a handful, because I was like, oh well, the students vote on them, so there's probably pretty simple But I think when I got there were like 40 rules, and now there's like 65 or something. It's just an ever growing list. These guys love boundaries, and um, it's cool. It's great.
Yeah,
It's great.
yeah,
Not genuinely, it's not. I wouldn't have picked that
yeah,
many rules, but
yeah.
it's
And I mean,
cool.
the ones that I've seen really, they make sense too.
Sure, yeah.
Make so
Yeah,
much
and a lot
sense.
of them are really specific to like our building and safety
Yeah.
with our building, and
Mhm.
since it's a
Mhm.
shared space and that sort of thing. So,
Right. So Ashley has a question. Any sense of what percentage of your students are neurodivergent, and
mm,
how do those kids seem to fare?
yeah, that's a great question, and it is a little bit challenging to answer because well, uh, some parents get diagnoses and some choose not to, and so as far as getting an accurate count on who is neurodiverse or not can vary. I would say I would say for sure at least half of our school. And I say school, that actually includes the adults in the space as well. We have a really neurodiverse community, and I think that the environment that we have kind of lends to being a place for neurodiversity to thrive, and for people who are coming in with, especially people who are coming in with school trauma. And I would include myself in that, because even though I'm far removed from school at this point, I experienced a lot of trauma in my experience with education in the public school system, and some private schools and university as well. So I think it's definitely kind of a breath of fresh air for anyone who's been in compulsory education, um, and I definitely see that in a big way with our neurodiverse students. Just in that there's kind of there's a time of sort of acclimating, and then a time of just a relief period, and really
Mhm.
sensing some of those anxieties lift around performance and that sort of thing.
So one of the unique things about Sudbury too is that we don't segregate students by age. So there's age mixing at the school.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how I know some parents are sort of like not worried about it, but it's a little like concerning. Is my
Yeah,
8-year-old going to be hanging out with a 16-year-old? That sort
yeah,
of thing. Like, how do you
definitely.
address those interactions?
Definitely. I hear like from both sides, right? Because there are
Mhm.
definitely parents who are like, "Oh, that's kind of crazy. Like my 10-year-old's going to be hanging around 16-year-olds." And then there's other parents who are like, "Oh, good. My teenager
Mhm.
needs to learn how to take care of, younger
Yeah.
kids or whatever." Which we do see, but I think it's for sure a massive learning curve, but it's also a really awesome opportunity, I think, for all age ranges, to be in a space where you have to share space with people who are just at different skill sets than you, and who are different levels of understanding than you are. And um, we see, because we don't segregate by age, we kind of get away from thinking of students as like, oh well, the younger students all do this, or the older students all do this. It's pretty mixed, and you can see an even blend of students doing different activities, and just at different rates or at different levels. But um, for the most part, I think that the biggest thing is learning boundaries, right? So with a lot of these older students, either they're going to be really nurturing and really excited to be around these younger students, and to kind of have younger students to mentor, and many of them do take on that role. But then there are some older students who are like, I'm not actually interested in spending time with young with little kids all day, which is totally understandable. And so learning to kind of set those boundaries, and kind of learning how to take up their space in that way, and be responsible and respectful in how they handle those situations. That's a really big learning opportunity, and um, it's been cool to see students navigate that. And of course, staff is there to help facilitate those kinds of conversations, and to help students learn how to hold boundaries like that. But I think it's really important for the younger students to learn those boundaries, and I think that the older students learning to exercise that, and set a good example, and also be willing to learn from the younger students. Those are all some really big positives that I see.
Mhm.
I see the learning going both ways quite often. Of course, it's like most people would expect that the younger students are taking a lot of cues from the older kids. But I think the older kids have a ton to learn from the younger ones as well. And the adults have, of course, so much to learn
Mhm.
from them as well.
Like in real life. You know,
Exactly. Yeah.
we work with all different people of different
Yeah,
ages.
exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, so I know this is a question that we've gotten frequently is, do Sudbury students go on to college? What do they do
Mm.
after they finish?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the beginning, our school is really young. We have only been around for a few years. We have not seen any students graduate yet because we are so young. Um, but Sudbury as a school or as a concept is not that young. And there have been Sudbury schools that have been in existence since the 60s. And so we can look around at least. At this point, it's not really an experiment anymore. I think a lot of people still think of it as like, oh, that's a really interesting thing you have going going on there. I wonder how it will turn out. But at this point, we actually don't have to speculate because there are so many Sudbury schools around the world. Um, and they graduate and go on to college at rates similar to homeschoolers, which is usually pretty typically similar to the rates of whatever location they're in of public schools, right? So
Mhm.
um, Sudbury students, I would say the difference between Sudbury students and students who go to college from a maybe compulsory education um, is that they are truly choosing it for themselves, right? I know that at least when I was in school and what I still gather from a lot of students in the last 10 years is that there's this tremendous amount of pressure to go to college for you don't know what reason, just that it's not you're not a successful person unless you do. And so I think a lot of students, and I for sure would include myself in that, you know, from more traditional educational backgrounds really just do feel like, well, this is the next step to take, and I don't really know why I need to do it for myself, but I know that I won't be successful in the world unless I go to college. Whereas I think with the Sudbury School and some of these other alternative ed institutions that are really pushing the self direction and giving students autonomy over their own time is that um, when they do decide to go to college, it's because they've actually given it some thought, and it's because it's something they're interested in and something they want to do for themselves. Um, so yeah, I think that as far as choosing to go to college versus feeling that pressure and just kind of like doing it because it's the compulsory next step,
Mhm.
I would say Sudbury students have a kind of an edge in that way, and really students of any background that are given the opportunity to direct their own learning.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much independence that goes on at Sudbury, and that just really reflects in the young people's, individual mental health and sort of
Yeah,
self-drive and ability to regulate. That's really something I think is so special about Sudbury.
yeah, me too.
Yeah. So often we'll get people who are interested in Sudbury who have a homeschooling
Mm,
background or
mhm.
experiences. How is homeschooling and Sudbury similar or different?
Yeah, sure. So the main thing is the community, right? The community aspect, because a family unit is going to be very different from operating in a community where you're not related to all the people who you have to kind of live and work and play with, right? So that's a big part of it. I'll also say I understand that homeschooling can take so many different shapes, right? And it can look lots of different ways, and you have everything from basically doing just a normal traditional education just in your home. So sticking to a curriculum that's determined by the state and kind of meeting these very specific benchmarks at very specific times. And I know homeschoolers who do that. And then I also know homeschoolers who practice something called unschooling, which is basically self-directed education where they let the child kind of decide what it is they want to learn about. And then they might go from there. And unschooling has a range as well of people being like, well, I'm going to build a curriculum about based on what my kids want to learn. And then other unschoolers who take it more toward like what we're doing, where they're like, well, I'm just going to kind of let it unfold organically, and whatever they do, and I'm there to support that. But I would say for sure the community aspect is kind of the big difference between what we're doing and what maybe unschoolers are doing who might look really similar to us, but don't have things like our school meeting where you have to operate within a community and make compromises and um, kind of work with your peers toward a common goal and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, and you're also in our environment, there's an aspect of being held accountable by the community and holding yourself accountable and being willing to hold other people accountable. And I think that those are pretty high level skills that require a lot of practice and uh, definitely is played out really differently in a community context versus one where you're in a family unit.
Right, right. Since you've been at Sudbury for about 2 years, right? You
Mhm.
said. Um, just from your experience so far, what kind of students do well at Sudbury or seem to thrive in that
Yeah.
environment better?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of people get the impression that Sudbury is kind of the place to go for kids who didn't make it or couldn't hack it in like public school or private school that's traditional, right? Um, like I kind of mentioned before, we see students who run the gamut of everything from kids who were very much not thriving in the public school system in any way, not academically or socially or emotionally or mentally. And then we also see students who are doing really well on paper and kind of look like a picture perfect student, but their anxiety was through the roof and they were struggling to sleep at night and they were having these social issues, even though, they appeared to be kind of a model student or whatever. I think that in general, um, students have to be willing to work within a community, and that kind of makes or breaks a student's experience, right? So um, there are students who I'm sure are not a good fit for Sudbury, who cannot um, maybe at wherever they're at in their stage of life, um, be able to really be held accountable or hold others accountable and kind of be in a community in that way. That does take some level of maturity. And while we have 6-year-olds who can do it, it's really challenging, and that's definitely something that students have to be willing to learn and kind of grow in that way. And if you're coming from a background um, where you expect to, yeah, I guess be able to do whatever you want, which there are some students who come from from backgrounds like that. That's more challenging than students who maybe had some social struggles in school or something like that. I see
Hmm.
a lot of kids who struggled socially in other environments come to our school and thrive. That's kind of a and I think just because they know what it's like to be in a space where they aren't heard and where they don't feel seen and where they do feel um, yeah, where they do feel that sort of oppressive feeling of not really fitting in socially, and then also maybe struggling academically. Like, I mean, I think those kids feel, like I said before, just an incredible amount of relief to be in an environment like ours, where they are given so much control of their time and responsibility. They have a lot of responsibility at Sudbury, um, and that's a super challenging part. But I also think it really helps students to kind of come into their own.
Yeah. So there's a pretty well-known book about Sudbury Model Schools called When Kids Rule the School, which I know wasn't really what the author had intended the title to
Yeah,
be.
right.
Um, but yeah, could you talk a little bit about, the how the kids help run the school? I know they're a
Yeah,
part of it. They don't necessarily rule it all, but yeah,
yeah,
they're an
totally.
important part of it.
It is ironic too, because I know when people hear that, and we use that phrase often, right? Where we advertise our school that way, like kids rule the school. And I think that when people hear that, for some reason, the connotation that it gives them, even though this is not what we're saying, is that
Yeah.
there are no rules at our school. And I actually get parents really often that'll come in, they'll be like, "So what's it like to be at a school with no rules, or how does it work for you guys to not have any rules?" Which is so funny because I mentioned before, we have like 65 rules or something that students all voted on and are coming from a majority vote. So they wanted these rules to be in place. But yeah, I think that democratic aspect and being able to have a platform and an opportunity at school meetings to come and to say, this is what I want at school, or this is what I want to do, or I really want this class to get started, or I'm really interested in learning this skill and I don't really know where to start. All of those sorts of or I guess having that as an opportunity to be able to bring up what you want your school to look like and what you want to be available to you at school, really allows it to be a space where kids can have a say in how it's run and who are the adults that are in the space to help facilitate that. Because like I said, we actually have a hiring process where if someone's interested in being a volunteer or a staff person, we bring them in, and a mix of students and adults will interview them, and then we put it to a vote. Is this person someone that we're going to have be at Sudbury to be a part of what we're doing? And it's pretty it's pretty awesome that I think that they should have the primary say, because they're the ones being mostly affected by that decision.
Right, right. This is kind of related to that last question. Ashley asked, can you speak to the types of responsibilities the students have? 'Cause
Yeah.
I know there were different committees, like
Yeah. Yeah.
committee and all these other safety committee, and then that's kind of changed into maybe
Yeah.
a larger entity, the student board, and
Yeah, we had like 12
yeah.
committees or something at one point, and so it was like everything from like the more obvious ones like safety committee or school meeting committee to like we had like a plant committee or something. But uh, but yeah, so now we have a student board, and they've kind of I think they're experimenting with having a student board because they've seen how the adult board at school sort of operates, and they're like, oh well, that makes sense. And um, yeah, so I think that for the most part, there's not very much that goes on at school that we aren't consulting students for, right? We have some restrictions around screen use that were that were more initiated by adults and kind of handed out by adults. But with the exception of that one thing, pretty much anything else that's going to happen at school is all going to a vote, and we're involving the students. So the committees and things like safety or taking care of like music equipment or being certified to go off campus, which is a big thing for our students. Or being certified even just to hang out on campus, but outside. And there's different levels of, well, you can go out there on your own, or you can go out there in a group of four, or you can be, off campus, but only if you're with a staff person, or you can go in groups of students without a staff person. And there's all these tiers of being certified for that. And students are responsible for helping create these certifications and then also for carrying them out. So we have a couple of students in particular who really take on the bulk of like the administrative stuff in, like certifying people to go off campus or certifying people to use the really super intense hot glue gun or certifying, kids to use other, equipment like musical instruments or that sort of thing. And the students are responsible for kind of coming up with these processes and then carrying them out. So there's
Yeah.
lots of different ones, and I feel like I'm missing so many because there's so many different processes required for the school to just run, and we really try to have students be involved in every aspect of those things.
Right. I mean, there's a lot of note taking and sort of administrative
So
work
much note
on
taking, yeah.
too.
Yeah, those
Yeah,
school meetings. Oh, and
yeah,
one thing I should mention before our session wraps up is we do have so our way of handling infractions and rule breaking and that sort of thing is what we call our judicial committee, and that's a massive responsibility for students. So our judicial committee is also another like kind of core tenet of our school that separates us from other schools and from homeschooling. And the way that it works, if a student breaks a rule, and all these rules are voted on, so that it's rules that the students haven't stated themselves. But if there's a time where a student or an adult breaks a rule, that person can get a write-up slip, and or I'm sorry, that person can be written up on a write-up slip, and then the judicial committee that's comprised of one staff person, one student, and then a juror who's selected at random for these different cases. Whenever a case comes up, they'll have a judicial committee meeting. They'll choose a juror, and then everyone who's on that slip, the person who did the write-up, so the person who saw the rule break or felt like there was a rule broken against them, the person who broke the rule, and then any witnesses that were listed that were around. And basically, it's a meeting where everyone kind of comes together and discusses what happened, and then judicial committee is responsible for deciding, was the rule broken, and if so, does there need to be any consequence? And of course we stick with logical and not punitive consequences. But yeah, that's a really big responsibility, and students are really involved in that process in terms of deciding how we want to uphold our rules, and yeah, what we should be doing when rules are broken.
right. And I know this is also another question that we sometimes get on tours is how do kids learn how to read, or how do they improve upon reading,
Yeah.
and sort of the, math, reading, sort of those basic skills that we think of in traditional schools. How
Yeah,
is
of
that
course.
developed at Sudbury?
Yeah, well, it is really interesting because if you look into it, that before compulsory education, people were teaching themselves to read for centuries, right? And I mean,
Right.
including before the one room schoolhouse or whatever. Like, learning to read is a skill that is necessary to survive our environment. The culture that we're in just is that's pretty necessary just to get by, right? So it comes up really quickly and really early. for humans in general in our culture, right? Not just when you turn 5 or whatever, but the way that students learn at Sudbury is as organic as anywhere else, right? So a lot of times they'll express an interest. A lot of students that I've observed since I've been there who were pre-reading before coming to Sudbury are interested in learning to read because of the video games, right? So they're playing a video game and they're like, I really want to know what it's saying because I can't, you know, excel in the game or proceed in the game because I constantly have to have someone come and tell me what the thing is saying. And I've seen students pick up reading skills from that because that's a really big motivator to learn to read, right? But in any student who is interested in reading and expresses an interest, we have adults in the space who are excellent at teaching students to read, and then a lot of students really do just pick it up through the environment, which is pretty innate to humans in general, picking up the skills that are necessary for us to thrive, right?
Right, right. You mentioned volunteers.
Mm.
So Sudbury is a micro school, and largely, we rely heavily on
Definitely.
staff, volunteers, board members, lots of people that help with the school. So what kind of function do volunteers, how do they help at Sudbury?
Yeah, so having adults in the space is really important, and for safety purposes, and then also just for being able to provide that example of lifelong learning and of being a safe adult in the space that students can come to for everything from practical things to moral support. And our volunteers, we've been really fortunate to have kind of an influx of volunteers in the past year, and so I think right now we have like 8. But in conjunction with the staff, they're really trying to help facilitate really whatever it is that the students are wanting to pursue. So, yeah, I would say we rely pretty heavily on volunteers, and depending on the day, we can have anywhere from, one volunteer in conjunction with the 2 staff that are always there, up to like 4 or 5 volunteers in the day, depending on how many students are there that day. Because we do offer part-time, there are some days where we don't have any part-timers, and then there are days where we have all the part-timers and the full-timers, and so it's can vary quite a bit, the level of traffic we have going on at school.
Right, yeah. Are there any other questions that you kind of hear often from parents that are interested in Sudbury?
I think you mostly covered them. The big ones, especially for these younger students. As a lot of parents want to know, how will they learn to read or write or learn math? And like I said before, so many of those skills are acquired through the necessity of just existing in the world. And when you come across things that you're interested in and that you have a passion for, being able to research those things is a skill that you need, and that requires reading. Being able to participate in the school functions requires writing. Everybody at the very least has to sign in and out at the beginning and the end of the day, and that's the introductory to writing for some of our students. But yeah, I think people, a lot of people are get the impression that Sudbury would turn out students who are like dancers and musicians and people who are in the arts. And it makes sense to me that when humans are given the opportunity, they would pursue creative pursuits. I think that that's really lacking in our culture, the opportunity to explore your spirit in a creative way. But I definitely think that in general, our school is really the environment for students to pursue whatever it is they're passionate about, whether that is something that is in the arts or something that's more mathematical. And we're really fortunate to have a really wide range of volunteers with a really wide range and scope of expertise. And so having like a mathematician and our volunteers and a historian, like all these things are really, we're really fortunate to have adults in the space who can kind of inspire students to pursue different things.
Yeah. So I know sometimes we have students who arrive at Sudbury who have experienced some bullying in previous school situations. how does that come up at Sudbury, with all of the different dynamics of the different age students and everything?
Yeah, I think that the innate like kind of lack of hierarchy amongst the student body really, really helps with the bullying. It's just not a part of our culture because we have kind of instilled this sense of like there's no like cool kids table at lunch and there's not like there's just really not that hierarchy because of the nature of the school. And I also think that the judicial committee really is a massive part in sort of um, keeping those sorts of things at bay because it comes up. That's a normal part of social growth and students, navigating and experimenting with powers with power dynamics because those do very much exist, right? Even if they're not segregated, and social power dynamics are always going to be a part of relating, and students navigating that with the support of judicial committee. And having that to sort of empower students who feel like, hey, I don't like how this person's treating me, or this feels really disrespectful, and knowing that they can write that person up and be a part of what it looks like to address it, I think is massive. Having students feel like they're empowered to advocate for themselves in that way, I think is massive. I know that many students who are coming from, especially some of these schools that have like 35 kids in a class or whatever, and
Yeah.
it's near impossible to collaborate with the students in that way every single time they're dealing with bullying. But in our school, we really are fortunate to have the ability and the structure in place to um, to support these students through navigating those things, and with compassion for everyone, right? The person who is doing the mistreating and the person who's being mistreated, and being able to try to get to those root causes versus just sort of trying to modify the behavior. That's a really big deal at our school, and I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. So I guess in our last few minutes, do you want to talk a little bit about just like the admissions process or how people visit and
Yeah, sure, absolutely. You can set up a tour on our website, and that's stlsudbury.org. Um, you can set up a tour there. Or you can call the school. The numbers on the website as well, and we can set up a tour that way. Coming in for a tour is kind of the first step, and that way you can see the space and kind of get a feel for what it looks like during the day. I know a lot of people have a hard time conceptualizing a school a school like ours. But after the tour, we offer 2 trial days, and those are no obligation, free of charge days where the prospective student, can come and be at school for the whole day, like a Sudbury student, basically, and kind of get the experience and see what it feels like to be there and to spend time with us. And we can kind of get a feel for the student, and from there, if they are interested in enrolling, then I take over that process, and we um, get the student to come in and do their enrollment interview, and it's pretty straightforward from there.
yeah, and so my son started about 2 years ago, and definitely wanted to throw this in here was that the application process and everything was just so straightforward and
Mhm.
so welcoming. I think my son just felt like really accepted by the kids really quickly, and just kind of the transition was pretty smooth.
We
Yeah.
try to be really, and you reminded me of this because of your son, but we try to be really accommodating because we recognize that a lot of students coming into our school do have school trauma, and a lot of them are apprehensive and kind of nervous. And even though our school, they'll even say like, "Oh, cool, I can draw all day," like, or whatever. They still there can be some apprehension. It can feel really daunting and scary to start a new school, and we have had students start with really, really low attendance to kind of get their feet wet, and we're really willing to work with families with that, and we try to make it as accessible as possible to students from all backgrounds. So if they're feeling like sort of that anxiety, we completely understand that, and we try to be pretty pretty accommodating to compromising and working out a situation where they can ease in and kind of feel comfortable with it and good about it. Oh, Jen, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I have somebody using a cutting board in the
Oh,
back.
it's okay.
Sorry. Um, so we have one more question from Becky, and she writes, I think it says, what would you do if you couldn't find one of the students? Maybe that's related to safety, I think, of the school
Sure,
or
yeah.
the area.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. Bethy, so good to hear from you. I think we were at Forest School together. So there's a couple of things. So our school is pretty secure. We're on the second floor of a building that locks, and you need a key to get in. There's definitely we have like a safety committee who is kind of responsible for helping the adults in the space maintain safety for everyone. If we couldn't find a student, there would be a good number of adults in our safety committee who would kind of pursue where we would need to be looking in order to find the student. But um, there's not a ton of supervision at Sudbury as far as adult supervision goes, right? And it's very common for students to be hanging out in rooms for much of the day and not have adult supervision unless they were seeking someone out for something. And so I think that that's important to make very clear. That is something that students are expected to be responsible for, is being able to follow the school rules and being able to stay on the floor that we're on. And we have had students who we are, able to help them, help support them through struggling with that on the front end. But that is definitely an area that students would need to be kind of responsible for themselves for, in a way, because it is not uncommon for students to be unsupervised at school.
Great. And I just wanted to mention too, St. Louis Sudbury School is celebrating our very first day of participating in Give STL Day, which is happening all day today and through tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'm sure you've seen all the posts and everything on social media. There's over 1,100 nonprofits that are participating in it today. So we are raising money for St. Louis Sudbury School. Our goal is 2,500, and I think we're about halfway there. So we're really excited to see so much early support for us. So right now in this hour up through 4 p.m., we're participating in what they're calling a power hour. And any contributions to our school will be amplified by the Burgess Family Foundation. And so we're just really excited about that. I'll list our link that you can go to if you're interested in donating. We appreciate any support very much.
Definitely.
Yeah. So do you have anything else you wanted to share, Mae?
We covered a lot of ground. I think we're okay.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see so many people here. And
yes, thank you.
Yeah, the recording will be up on our Facebook page and YouTube if anyone wants to go back and review anything. But definitely feel free to email us at that info@stlsudbury.org email address, or send us a message on Facebook or Instagram. And we really hope to meet some of you and see you at Sudbury. All right. Thank you, Mae.
Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for coming. And please check us out on our website. Yeah, thanks again.
All right. Thank you.